Is preparing. There it goes. It just tweeted live with Restream. Cool. Okay, here we are. Nick, thanks a lot for doing this. We'll give it a second so folks can join in. But just right off the bat, how are we feeling?
Feeling great. Thanks for doing this, putting this together, Blake. I'm excited to talk to some of the voters and followers that we have on social media.
I am excited that we're doing this. I think this is a really cool way, especially given the state of the world, given what's going on with the pandemic. This is a really good way for us to communicate with voters, get the message that you want to put forward out there in a really innovative way that is a direct connection. So I'm excited for us to get to do this.
Me as well.
So while we, let's see here, get everything all set up, and it is working. I've got the thing popping up telling me that it's working, which is great. Why don't you just go ahead and, because like I said, I wanted to, when I was talking to you about it personally, I said I was going to ask you just some pretty basic questions. And one of them is because, like, the more that I'm around you, every day I hear a new, it's one of those sort of those cute little stories that a lot of people consider to be like political origin stories, things like that are just really cool moments that everyone has in their history. And so the one that I really like is when you talk about your first job. And so I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind to talk a little bit about your first job.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. So I had the best coworker, when I got my first job, and that was actually my mom. I was about 4 or 5 years old. We had just moved to Romance, Arkansas. My parents were in the military, and they were stationed in Germany, where I was born, and then at Fort Hood in Texas for a couple of years. And then about a year after we moved up here to Arkansas, my mom was pregnant with my sister, and then had my little sister Sydney. And then my dad was working full time, and we needed some extra money to pay the bills. And so my mom got a newspaper route, early morning kind of deal. And so I remember hopping in the truck with her. We'd go over to Cersei, and I'd help her roll the newspapers. You put them in the little baggies, or sometimes you just put a rubber band around it. And we'd hop back in the car with our totes full of newspapers, and we'd go on the route, and we'd toss them out the window. I think that's where I got my good aim that I eventually used when I played baseball and football. But yeah, we would throw the papers out, and that's something that was really fun for me. It was quality time with my mom, and we'd load up some coffee, and we'd listen to, I remember vividly listening to like Alan Jackson on a tape in our old truck. And yeah, it was good times. But that's just an example of my family, and just how working class we are. They had to work some side gigs like a newspaper route. My dad was an umpire for high school baseball and American Legion baseball, and I would tag along when I was little. My sisters would tag along when they could, and just something we had to do to make ends meet.
And you mentioned that this is one of those moments where and you talked about before, where your parents had to work more than one job, right? And so this is, you, a young guy, not even in kindergarten, waking up early, going out with your mom, helping her on one of these jobs. Do you have any other examples of that growing up when there was a time when you recognized that, or was there a time when you first recognized that your parents had to do that?
Yeah, I don't know if there's just one example that sticks out, but I just know that they've worked their tails off my entire life. They always getting up early, always going to work, sometimes working those second gigs. And it was never really something they boasted about, never something that they made sure everybody knew about, right? It was just something that they did because they had to provide for me and my two little sisters. And so yeah, I don't know if there's one example that really sticks out, but I just know that that's something that's been prevalent, and really an example for me and my sisters as we've grown up. And yeah, it's been a blessing to have such hardworking parents. And honestly, they've instilled that in us, and made sure that we make sure we've worked hard and pushed us, whether that was in academics in school, or as we've gone off to college or entered the workforce. That's something they really tried to instill in us as well.
When did you personally, have you always been someone that's been interested in politics? I can almost obviously point to my first interest in it. When did that come up for you? Not from an ideological standpoint, but just when did you first realize that politics, government, civics, that was something that you were really interested in?
Yeah, there's a couple different points as I was growing up. I remember, kind of my first memories of like watching the news, or just kind of, figuring out what the world was all about was, 9/11. I remember that day, what all we did. I don't think I really understood what was going on. I was in the second grade. I knew something was happening, but not really exactly what all it meant. But I do vividly remember watching the news whenever the Iraq War began and we were bombing Baghdad, and just, being amazed that something like that was happening, um, halfway across the world. And I still don't know if I understood what was going on at the time, but my parents have always, watched the news and been very active voters. And so, that always intrigued me, asking them what was going on in politics. In the eighth grade, we did like the mock election. And so that kind of piques your interest a little bit. I've always been interested in, civics and history classes growing up. But the one thing that really did kind of turn things for me was when I was in the sixth and going into the seventh grade. I attended a leadership forum in Washington, D.C. For a week. I was nominated by one of my teachers, and we actually had to fundraise the money because it was a couple $1,000 to pay for everything. And we had to fundraise the money. And to do that, we did a fundraiser at the park. And so we had to ask the local city council in Rosebud, where I'm from, to use the park. And so I had to get up, little sixth grade Nick, and give a speech in front of the Rosebud City Council, which is great foreshadowing, by the way, of my later work. But yeah, and so that was, I was at a young age learning, hey, this is local government. You have to, speak in front of people sometimes, get on the agenda, be introduced to people who are in office. And then, yeah, I went to DC for a week, and that was amazing. Of course, getting to see all the monuments, learning about all the history, just being in the seat of government in our country, and learning about leaders from the past, like FDR, like Dwight D. Eisenhower, people who were great leaders of this country. And that really started to pique my interest as I went up through high school and then on to college.
Well, we've got a little over 20 people watching right now on Twitter. And folks, if you have questions for Nick, please do put them in the chat here about either just growing up, or if you have policy questions, any information you want to know about the campaign, just let us know. We'll pass them along and hear from him, obviously. We appreciate everybody joining us here on their Saturday evening. By the way, if you haven't seen the tweet It was just put up a little over an hour ago. Just a reminder, if you want a chance to see another interview with Nick, the first interview he's done since being a candidate with Roby Brock will be on tomorrow morning. He is going to be on Talk Business and Politics, and that is his obviously his first foray into statewide televised politics with an interview. That'll be on again tomorrow morning, 9:30 KATV. Nick, like we were both there for the interview, and I just want everybody to know the first thing he said after we walked out was, "I don't know why I was nervous." But how did you feel about the interview?
Yeah, I thought it went really well. It wasn't a super long interview. I'm not sure exactly how many minutes. I think it was under 10 minutes for sure. But yeah, I thought it was a good introductory interview for me, just letting people get to know a little bit about my background, the work I've done. But then, of course, really excited to talk a little bit about the issues and kind of things that are at the top of my mind that we're going to tackle in this campaign.
Well, it sounds like a great segue into what are those issues? What are the issues? How did we arrive here? How did the 27-year-old former Rosebud City Council member decide that, I was on the city council, I ran for mayor. The next thing, the natural step for me is Congress.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I see it as a natural step, because it very much probably isn't in conventional politics. But I've talked about how my family's working class and I'm from a rural area, and that is what's driving me to run. We have been told our entire lives, if you work hard, you'll be successful, you'll have all this opportunity. But and that's the American dream, right? But too often for my family, for many families across this district and across the state and across the country, we just have not seen that. It's been the American reality, not the American dream. And so, I wanted to jump in because I feel like the communities like where I live and communities across this district deserve a representative that's from the community, that has worked in communities like ours, and is going to bring that fight to Washington. Don't love to do negative campaigning a lot, but the fact of the matter is our current representative, French Hill, is a millionaire. He's an investment banker. He's someone that, has been in Washington for 6 years now. And really, what major legislation has he passed? And I just think there's so many concerns that families and communities across the state have, and across the second district, that are just not being heard in Washington. And so that's my reason for jumping in. I feel like a lot of my experience and qualifications really fit the district well. I've been a rural community organizer. I've worked with people, Republicans, Democrats, independents, local government officials. And I really think that will translate well to Congress, where you have to work with a bunch of different people, but also being able to have a vision, right? Being able to be a little creative and say, hey, like here's a problem that we have. What is a bold and appropriate solution to solve that problem? And I think that's something that I've done in my experience, and hoping to do that for the people of the second district.
Great. And so we've got a couple of questions here. Let's go ahead and get to the first one. This comes from Facebook. It's Steve. Steve says, everywhere I look, it seems like there is a massive employee shortage. This happened after the pandemic breakout, and a lot of it is due to lack of childcare availability. Do you think it's possible to create communities that have pre-K and childcare provided at a reduced rate or free?
That's a great question, Steve. Short answer is yes. I think we can provide that for free. I am 100% in support of universal pre-K, universal childcare. And this is actually something that may be in the economic plan that President Biden and Congress is working on right now. But yeah, I'm so in favor of that. And I think that is one of the big reasons why there are some people who haven't gone back to work yet. Not only are they concerned about their safety, but they, when school's not in session, and that's a whole nother topic as we start to get into school starting back and, what COVID is going to be doing to our schools and communities, they just don't feel comfortable going back out into the workforce. And so, I support that decision. They know what's best for their safety and for the health of their families. But I think what we're seeing overall is that a lot of workers are going back to work. Our unemployment rate in Arkansas is still pretty low compared to what it got up to last year. But for the workers that haven't gone back, I think what we're seeing is that, a lot of these jobs are in the service industry. They are jobs that, historically really haven't paid a good wage. And what workers are starting to realize is that the wage they were making before is not enough. It's not enough to feed their families. It's not enough to pay their bills. And so they're looking for better jobs, right? They're looking for jobs that are going to pay a living wage, which is another thing I'm in favor of. And so, yeah, I think pre-K and childcare is a big part of that. And another thing on pre-K and childcare, this is the most important age for kids as they develop, 0 to 5, kind of that early stage before they get into the K through 12 education system. This is the most important years for them to develop. And we kind of treat it like an afterthought, right? We don't pay preschool teachers well. My younger sister is a preschool teacher. She doesn't make a living wage as a living wage is defined. We make it unaffordable in a lot of places. And we don't provide adequate training for those teachers and for those staff. And so I think that's something the federal government has to tackle. Major countries around the world have universal pre-K, universal childcare already. It's definitely something we can do. It's something we should do. It's just about, having representatives and leaders in office that are going to vote for that.
Great. And once again, thank you, Steve, on Facebook for that question. Hillary on Twitter asks, will minorities and women be a higher consideration for you and your staff for representation? Yes,
absolutely. Absolutely. We are committed to hiring a diverse staff, committed to making sure, and that I don't think that just goes to demographics. Obviously, that's really important, but just a diverse group of people with different backgrounds, different experiences. That is what makes. I think that's what's going to make our campaign strong. But that's also what makes diverse workplaces strong. That's what makes our country strong, right? Having a diversity of experiences and backgrounds, but also being intentional about hiring folks that historically have been marginalized and not been hired in leadership positions or and frankly in campaign world. Typically the staff positions go to the people who have the most experience or who have the connections, right? But we've got to hire people that know their community, and maybe they don't have the most campaign experience in the world, but they have their lived experience, and they have the experience in their community that's desperately needed.
All right, another question from Twitter. Congress is very noticeably partisan right now. Do you believe you can encourage bipartisanship?
Yeah, so there's two things I want to say about this. So the first one is, yes, I think so. I was a city council member. It was nonpartisan. So we ran as independents. And so, the people I was on the city council with and our mayor, we were from all kinds of, ideological backgrounds. Some of us are Republicans, some are Democrats, some were true independents. And so, working with, even though it was nonpartisan, right, you're having to work with those different set of beliefs, especially on issues. And so, yes, I feel like my background working on the city council and getting things done there will help a lot. And I just want to say I'm open to working with anybody on the things that we agree with, whether that's a Republican or another Democrat or an independent. I will say this, though. I think bipartisanship in itself should not be the end. I think at the end of the day, we have to focus on the problems that our constituents and that our communities face, and what is the actual solution that's going to solve that problem. Because I would make the argument, and it might not seem like it, but bipartisanship has been happening. We do continue to pass budgets in a bipartisan manner. We continue to do some things. And I think working across the aisle is important. But that in itself should not be an end, because a lot of the times those compromises that are given up on are watered down solutions that don't actually solve the problem, and things continue to get worse no matter what that issue is. And so I think, yes, I can work across the aisle, but bipartisanship on its own should not be the end.
I think that's a really, really great point. It's so important. It seems almost like the point that you're making here, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the point that you're making here is bipartisanship for bipartisanship's sake.
Yes.
is not the goal. It's a theater almost, and there's enough of that already in Washington.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So we've got another question. This is from Kelly on Facebook. Kelly says, the small farmer in Arkansas has some definite disadvantages, like processing availability and higher than average cost to get your product to market. Do you think if elected, you can make a difference for so many small farm families in your district?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Kelly. This is something that is really important in Arkansas. Agriculture is our top industry. You know, we have so many small family farmers in the state. And yeah, of course, I think that when we're talking about agriculture as a whole, we have to protect family farmers. They're the backbone of the industry. They're the backbone of how we get our food. And, you know, too often these days, just like the rest of the economy, agriculture is becoming corporatized. You have big businesses gobbling up land. You have corporations taking over family farms. And, you know, for example, I think Bill Gates is the largest owner of farmland in the country now. If that's right, I'm pretty sure that's what came out recently. And so, you know, that's just a little weird when you know, one of the richest people in the world is now getting into that just for profit's sake. I think we've got to get back to the root of what agriculture and farming is all about, right? It's about feeding our communities and taking care of the land. And so I am for community food systems, making it more localized so that the farmers in our communities are feeding the people in our communities. And I think, to your point, or to your question about opening up markets, I think federal, but also state and local governments have to play a bigger role in opening up those markets. You know, for example, in Rosebud, where I'm from, it's a really small town. The farmers in that area should be feeding the school district. They should be supplying products to the restaurants in the area. And, you know, any other business that uses those products should be getting them from the local farmers. And that's only going to also help climate change, right? You're reducing our carbon footprint, not having to ship things across the country or across the world. Of course, we're always going to be importing and exporting things to different markets in other places, and that's a great thing too. But I think we have to get back to the root of it, and that's about taking care of the land, making sure we have healthy soil, so doing farming in a more regenerative way. And then, yeah, about feeding the local community. So thank you for that question.
So we've hit on now the economy, and we talked about, and absolutely right, farming we know is king in Arkansas in terms of agriculture. We're #1 in rice, and we're in the top, I believe we're still in the top 5, 5th or 4th in soybean production in the country. So farming is the backbone of the economy here in the state. And you know it. I'm also from a small town, not quite as small as Rosebud, but you know, I went to school with a lot of the farmers, you know, with a lot of their kids who are now taking over the family farms. And it does seem like almost year after year, you're hearing about fewer of them being left. And
let me make another point on that real quick, Blake.
Please.
Because that's something we really don't talk about a lot either, is just the average age of most farmers in the country. It's up there, you know, I think it's in the 60s or 70s. And so, you know, what kind of programs are we putting in place to make sure that those family farms can continue on? And, you know, even if not family farms, ensuring that they're not gobbled up by a corporation, but they're being passed to someone who's going to continue that same type of, you know, small farming model, I think is important. And so, you know, I think we have to have more programs that are training up young farmers and giving them the skills they need, not only the farming skills, right, but the business skills to be able to continue that and feed our communities.
I think that's a very great point. And we are seeing that, and do you think part of it is because this is also a thing that affects southern states in particular? We're seeing it in Arkansas. Sometimes we hear Arkansas referred to as the brain drain, right? Our best and brightest graduate high school and they go to college somewhere else, or they graduate and then they move to a different part of the country for better job opportunities. That in and of itself is also a huge issue for the state. That's more a state issue, but I think to your point, there are some difficulties here. Do you think we need to focus on incentivizing the ability for these folks to stay local? Do you think that needs to be part of the calculation?
Oh, it absolutely has to be. It has to be. This is something that me and a lot of my friends have dealt with. I actually worked out of the state for about a year. And especially because in our field, there's not a ton of job opportunities, especially ones that pay really well. And I have a master's degree. And so, we have to make sure we're keeping Arkansans in Arkansas if they want to be. Of course, people are always going to move, right? But yeah, it's something that is crucial to keeping our local economies going. I think there are some parts of the states that are doing well. Northwest Arkansas, I think Central Arkansas, especially Little Rock, is doing well. This is a big problem in rural areas, especially. People in small towns always talk about, the young people, they leave and they never come back. Why aren't there more young people? And there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the biggest ones is there's just no opportunity. There's no job opportunities. There's no opportunities for them to step into leadership positions. And so we have to think long term. We have to think holistically when we're talking about keeping those people here. And I think that it's something that as we look to the future and we look at how competitive our economy is with the rest of the world, we have to get serious about making sure we're keeping workers here in Arkansas, here in the U.S., and paying them well. And that's another thing. For some people, it's quality of life. They want to live in a place that has all of the services and amenities that they need, but a lot of it is just the salary and the wages that they're paid. Some of it is housing as well. If there isn't adequate housing in the place they want to live or the place where they're getting a job, they're going to look for another opportunity. And so I think building affordable housing is going to be critical, not just for rural areas, but for everywhere.
All right. Another question from Facebook. This comes from Kenneth. He says, you've hit on some of the things for the rural areas of the district in the state, but the second district also has a sizable urban population. What kinds of policies would you look to support that would benefit them?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And that's why I love the second district, right? I'm from a rural area, but it really is a lot like the U.S., right? It's got urban, suburban, and rural areas all in the second district, assuming it doesn't change too much after redistricting. So, yeah, that's a really good question. So the first thing I would say, and that I really want to work on if I'm elected to Congress, is public transportation. This is something that is very much more prevalent in urban areas just because of the density of the amount of people that live there. But we have to start really investing in public transportation. This is something that will help combat climate change. It's going to create lots of jobs, and it's going to ensure that people can get around their city in a more efficient way. It's going to make our cities better places to live. They're going to be more walkable. They're going to be more green. And yeah, public transportation, I think, is a really big part of that. And I'll say this though, I think another big part or another thing I'd like to work on, and probably won't hear a lot of Democrats, willingly talk about this unless they're asked, but I think in a lot of places, crime is a big worry for a lot of people, and I think we have to reimagine what public safety looks like in our communities, especially in our urban areas. My mom is a state trooper. She has been in law enforcement for almost 20 years now. And so I think we have to have people willing to, be proactive on this issue, and not just talk about it when bad things happen, when shootings happen, or when crime spikes, or when crime spikes, right? And that's what I feel like we see too often in politics is we start talking about crime whenever it's really advantageous for one side or the other. I think we have to reimagine what public safety looks like. Looking at the kind of staff that we're funding. Are we making sure we have social workers and mental health workers in these departments that can go on certain calls that maybe an armed police officer shouldn't be at? But also, I think when we're looking at any issue like crime, or just in our urban areas or rural areas for that matter, are people's basic needs being met? Do they have shelter? Do they have food? Do they have a job that pays a living wage? I think all of these factors contribute to things like crime. And I think that no matter if you live in, for example, Little Rock or Conway, or a place like Mayflower or Rosebud that's more rural, there are certain issues that are maybe more prevalent than others. But I think a lot of these issues also connect across city or town size. So there are definitely issues that are more prevalent in rural or urban areas, but I'm hoping to work on solutions that benefit all.
Great. And once again, thank you to Kenneth on Facebook for that question. I want to, you touched on it briefly there in your answer at the top of it. We talked about redistricting. This is something that you have been asked about in passing, sort of. You haven't had an opportunity to give some long form answer so far. I'm sure you will later on in the campaign, but I want to give you an opportunity to be able to answer that in general about redistricting. This is the first time in Arkansas's history that Republicans are in charge of redistricting. I will say on the onset, just as some facts that we have been looking at when it comes to the second district, White County, where of course Nick is from, has been in the second district longer than Pulaski County. Now that goes back to the time when Arkansas had 5 or 6 congressional districts as opposed to 4, but White County has actually been in the second district for 120 years. So when we're talking about larger reforms at the federal level to the way that the systems of government operates, redistricting, gerrymandering is one of the big ones. What's your stance there with regards to redistricting and gerrymandering? What do you think the federal government needs to do about it?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I have had people ask me personally, redistricting hasn't happened yet. And just for folks, and I won't go too deep into this, but redistricting happens after every census. It's when we redraw the lines for Congress and we redraw the lines for the state legislatures. And even on down to school districts and county JP lines. And so this happens every 10 years. In a normal year, this would have already happened. We'd already have new maps, more than likely by now. But with COVID and some of the delays in the Census Bureau has delayed the data for redistricting getting to the states. And so I believe as of right now, the end of September is when that data is supposed to be released to the states, if it doesn't get pushed back again. And so, so as far as the big picture, right, when we're talking about redistricting, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, you'll see these congressional maps that just look wild. They look like snakes. They barely connect in some areas. You'll have, areas that aren't connected at all by any other way except that they're just in the same state, be in the same congressional district. And it's not that so, and we call that gerrymandering, right? That's where politicians are choosing who their voters are because the people that control the redistricting process in a lot of places are politicians. So for example, in Arkansas, the state legislature will draw our congressional lines, and then the Board of Apportionment, who is the governor, the Secretary of State, and the Attorney General, will draw the lines for the state legislature. And what that means is that, like Blake said, in Arkansas, Republicans are going to control the entire process. In the past, it's always been Democrats because we've been a Democratic state for so long. But what I propose is that we take politics out of this, and there's a lot of states that have done this already. But what they have is independent redistricting commissions that have experts in GIS and in other fields that come together, and even I think they use a lot of high-tech computer systems that I don't know a lot about to see what maps make the most sense that are following federal law as it relates to drawing the maps. And we've seen those states be a lot more representative. I think a lot of those states are more purple, if I'm not mistaken. They aren't so extreme Republican or so extreme Democrat. And so I think establishing those is going to be critical, frankly, for the future of our democracy, right? We, with as polarized as we are right now, we have to have, the very process that sets our district boundaries be fair. And, I think anyone that is not willing to come out in favor of independent commissions redrawing our lines every 10 years it's frankly embarrassing. And I think it's anti-democratic. Now, as far as for me, we're still waiting. So later this year, the state legislature is going to reconvene when they get that census data. They're going to come back and they're going to take up proposals for the new maps, and then they're going to start bargaining with each other. And I think a lot of times people like to think that these things are set in stone. There's just kind of a perfect way that this happens, but it's literally going to be a bill that's proposed with different district lines drawn. And then legislators are going to bargain, change things, and we'll see what we end up with. I'm going to run for the 2nd district no matter what. Right now, the 2nd district is 7 counties: Pulaski, Faulkner, Saline, Van Buren, Perry, Conway, and White County, mostly central Arkansas. Hopefully that doesn't change too much. But, even though I grew up in White County, I'm from the district, right? I went to UCA for my undergraduate. I've lived in Conway for 5 years, which is in Faulkner County. I've worked in Pulaski County, I've worked in Little Rock, and I've worked with communities all across the district. And so I feel most comfortable running for the 2nd district here in central Arkansas, no matter what that ends up looking like. And just the final point on this is why HR 1 is so important that's in Congress right now. It's something that the House has already passed. The Senate hasn't taken, or they've taken it up. They're negotiating pretty much unless we get rid of the filibuster or reform it to pass this. It's probably going to die in the Senate, but it will pretty much outlaw gerrymandering and make states have to use independent commissions for their redistricting, which no matter if you're a Republican or Democrat, that's just a win for democracy. And that's what I'm in favor of.
All right. Kenneth asked another question. I'm going to skip over it. Kenneth, we'll come back to you since you've already asked one, but Rob just asked a question on Facebook. Rob says, I'm a 77-year-old on Social Security fixed income, and my cost of living increase hasn't kept up with inflation. And after the pandemic, it's especially bad. Healthcare costs in particular have gotten out of control. How are you going to help me if you're elected?
That's a really great question. So I'll take the first part of that first, talking about Social Security. This is something that, I know a lot of older Arkansans are worried about, right? The people that are on, receiving Social Security benefits right now. But it's also something that my generation is worried about too, because if we do not do something to secure Social Security and make sure that it's physically solvent, we may see reduced benefits by the time we get there, or we may not have those benefits. I think by the last check, it was like 2035 or 35 years from now, those benefits may run dry. And so I think there's a couple things we have to do. I think we do, and this is something that President Biden ran on, but we have to expand benefits. It has to keep up with the cost of inflation. I think that should be adjusted into it every year to make sure that people, are keeping up with that inflation that happens normally. And I think there's a couple things we can do to make sure Social Security remains financially viable. So I think we should make sure that income, all income is taxed for Social Security. So right now it only goes up to about 137,000 of someone's income is taxed for Social Security. And this primarily benefits wealthy people, right? That's, if you make 137 or less, that's the money getting taxed and put into the Social Security fund. Anything over than that is not being taxed and put into Social Security. So I think lifting that level up, or honestly just maxing it out so that the wealthy are paying their fair share into that, I think is a good start. And then I think we need to lower the taxes that are applied to Social Security beneficiaries. I think we have to lower those taxes. So, whenever you receive your Social Security check, there's already taxes taken out of that. I think that those taxes that are taken out should be lower so that people are taking home more in their checks every month.
Great. You hit on this sort of when you talked about the inflation aspect of this. I think this is a question that I want to ask, and then Kenneth, I promise we'll get to yours. You've talked about, and you did talk about this in the interview again, that's going to air tomorrow morning on KATV, 9:30 tomorrow morning. Roby Brock on Talk Business Politics. That's going to be Nick's first television interview. Make sure you watch it. We'll probably have links to it online and everything afterwards on all the social media, but make sure you watch it live tomorrow morning. You talked about raising the minimum wage and tying it to inflation. That's something that I think is really important. Do you think, just on principle, something like the minimum wage, something like income for folks, is something that needs to be taken out of the hands of politicians? Do you think that that needs to be something that politicians no longer get to decide?
I'll be honest, I haven't really ever thought of it in those terms. I think it makes a lot of sense to make it more of a technical or maybe more scientific aspect, to where we are tying it to inflation or the cost of living, to make sure that as those things rise or fall, that the minimum wage is being attached to that, so that we haven't seen what we're seeing now, where the minimum wage nationally hasn't been raised in years, where you're having to have individual states and cities raise their wage substantially just to keep up with cost of living. And so, I don't know what that would look like to take it completely out of the hand of politicians, just because it's politicians that have to pass the budgets and pass the laws. I'd be open and would love to see any proposal on that. I don't think it's a horrible idea, just from what you described, though.
All right, let's go ahead and double back here. I promised we'd get back to Kenneth's questions. Let's go ahead and hit it. You touched on crime, and an offshoot of that is the highly politicized issue of gun control. What are your thoughts on this controversial issue? Do you feel that it might be mislabeled and that it's more about an issue of gun safety?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that assessment. It's only controversial because politicians make it controversial. I think what we've seen from polling is that 80-90% of Americans agree on issues about guns, right? I just want to say I support the Second Amendment. I think people should be allowed to have guns. That's not controversial. But I think we do have to be realistic about what I consider to be an epidemic of gun violence in this country. We have seen amazing community organizations like Moms Demand Action step up and really advocate for these issues. But for too long, we've seen, special interest groups like the NRA twist the facts, provide misinformation on these issues. Look, I hate the phrase common sense gun reform, because that's the phrase that's always used. But we've got to get guns out of the hands of people that shouldn't have them, people that have committed violent crimes, whether that's domestic violence or any violent crime. There's no reason for them to have access to a firearm. They've proven that that they do not have the capacity to handle that in a responsible manner. I think things like universal background checks, closing gun show loopholes, and making sure we have a better system in place to track the sales of guns would be great. I think that's things that most Americans agree on. And yeah, too often this issue is twisted and made into something that it's not. But I think that the reforms that have been mentioned, would not harm a responsible gun owner at all. I think we've had guns in our house growing up. My mom's a cop. My parents were both in the military. I think that we have people who do own a firearm. They need to be trained on that, and not just trained on how to use it, but trained in the safety of just having that in your house, so that accidents don't happen. Not just violent crime, but we've seen that gun violence and access to guns has led to increased suicides, and that's really, really sad, really unfortunate. And it could be stopped if we had some of these really common sense and popular gun reforms in place. I'd just like to point out that other countries have done some of these things, and it hasn't impeded on anyone's rights. No one is coming to take anyone's guns. I feel like that's something that's been parroted by the other side for years and still hasn't happened. It's not going to happen. No one wants to do that. So I appreciate that question, and something that I know is on the mind of a lot of, especially Arkansans.
Great. We have another question. Are you in support of changing medical marijuana laws so medical card holders can grow their own plants for personal use?
I'd have to look into that specific proposal and see what that was all about. I will say I'm in favor of medical marijuana. Obviously, the voters passed that overwhelmingly several years ago, and I'm glad that people are being able to use it to get the treatment that they need. But I'll also say I'm in favor of making recreational marijuana legal. This is something that for too long has been classified as some kind of hard drug when it's just a plant. And people, a lot of people have used it throughout our country's history. A lot of people have grown it, and it's frankly been used to demonize a lot of communities. It's been used to lock up people in jail. There are people still in jail right now for selling or using marijuana. We're not hurting anybody or anything, but just for those simple facts of selling or using it. Those people need to be released. We need to legalize it. Think about the amount of tax revenue that we could get in to fund things like our schools and our healthcare system, and create more jobs. If we would take the lead of other states and do it nationally, and legalize it. And so, as far as the medical marijuana, letting people grow it themselves, as far as I'm concerned, if it's legal, I don't see why not. Yeah. So that's my answer to that question.
All right. Rosa says, "Hola, Nick. Excited about you running for Congress. With deferred action for childhood arrivals, DACA, on the line, putting 800,000 people, including about 7,000 recipients in Arkansas, in jeopardy. What's something you want to see happen and would help champion if elected?"
Yeah, this is a great question, and something after that recent decision has been on my mind. So I do want to start by saying that it's a shame just how broken our immigration system is right now. People I know, people I've heard of, it just takes so long to just navigate the system, and it's such a burden. And that's something where, we talk a lot about government efficiency, but that's something to where, we control that. We could change that if we wanted to, and we just don't do it. This is another issue that's been politicized. It has been sad to see how Republicans have played into the fear mongering that we've seen when it comes to the issue of immigration. What I would like to see happen is I would like to see DACA recipients and undocumented people in this country have a pathway to citizenship as soon as possible, but not just the pathway to citizenship as the system is now. I think we've got to make that pathway quicker. I think we've got to make it less burdensome. There's so many people that, most immigrants that came to this country did so legally, and they've overstayed their visas, or there's been other paperwork issues, and to me that's not their fault. That's the fault of the system. And so I think we need to make sure we're doing the right things administratively, and this could be an area where we actually create jobs, right? Let's beef up the administration of this. Let's the legal aspect of it. Let's create some jobs, make it easier to get people along this pathway to citizenship, make it to where they don't have to spend thousands of dollars in legal fees just to become a citizen. And the last point I'll make is this, and I'm not going to mention names, but there's I have a friend, an old classmate in high school that that's a DACA recipient. And so I mentioned earlier, I was born in Germany. We didn't come back to the US until I was a little over a year old. My friend that's a DACA recipient came over when they were 6 months old. And so they have been in the US physically longer than I have. But just because my parents were already citizens, and just because of a piece of paper, they have had to jump through hoops their entire lives. They've had to have deportation in the back of their mind as something that could happen to them or their family. And I think it's just cruel that we make people live with these things in the back of their head. And as a reality, every day that they're people that are good people, they're hardworking, that are contributing to our economy, to our communities, and that they've been demonized. And so I think that this is an issue that, it's been talked about a lot. We've tried to pass comprehensive immigration reform. We've actually got to get people that they're going to do it, not use this issue as a political talking point. French Hill earlier this year was down at the border with a bunch of other Republicans. Like, what are you doing down there? That's just a political stunt. What legislation are you drafting to actually fix our immigration system? And that's what I hope to do if I'm elected. Thank you for that question, Rosa.
That's a wonderful point. I'm glad you brought it up. And it's something that I think really does need to be hammered a lot more often than it is when we're talking about the number of people in the country that are undocumented. I don't know why no one has ever stopped to wonder how we can even approximate that figure. And the reason we know we can approximate that figure is because we know the majority of folks that are in the country illegally came here legally. And just like you said, they have overstayed their visas because they get caught up in this system that in some cases have laws that predate modern transportation. And so we're not accounting for so many different factors when it comes to this the current immigration system. And like you mentioned, with regards to the political tool nature of this, it was not that long ago that a senator from Florida by the name of Marco Rubio co-sponsored a bipartisan immigration reform proposal, and then ended up opposing his own bill because he wanted to run for president and knew it wouldn't play well in his own party. So you bring up one of the most important points about this. Let's see. We do have another question from Laura, who says, if elected, what will you do to protect both women's reproductive rights and protect LGBTQ youth in our state?
That is a really great question. So let me take the first one. I just want to say that somehow women's reproductive rights has become one of probably the most controversial issue in our politics and our society through the word abortion. I think that's sad. I am 100% pro-choice. I believe in a woman's right to choose what to do with her body. And and so I think this happened recently, but the Hyde Amendment was taken out of the HHS budget by Congress, and so this is something that President Biden campaigned on. But that would remove the ban on federal funding of abortions. Yeah, at the end of the day, people have to have the freedom, to make their own choices with their body. And it doesn't make any sense to me how some people, we're going through COVID right now, and some people say that they want the personal freedom to not wear a mask or not take a vaccine, but then, they can't hold that same point, throughout, when it comes to such a personal decision like woman's right to choose or just reproductive health overall. Let's see. I think that for anybody out there who may consider themselves, pro-life, which, first of all, those terms are very inaccurate, and I hate that it's split up into those factions, because being pro-choice is pro-life. But for people who may be more conservative or typical quote unquote pro-life, I just want to say there are ways that we can reduce abortions. Comprehensive sex education, access to birth control, access to healthcare, and access to childcare. If we're going to be pro-life, let's do it throughout people's lives. Let's not just do it when it's a fetus, right? But let's do it when we're talking about all of the policies that affect kids and that affect people in this country. And what was the second part of the question, Blake?
The second part of the question is rights to protect LGBTQ youth in the state.
Yeah, this is very tough, because the laws that were passed in this last session, especially attacking trans youth in the state, was just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous that we can't be humans. We can't interact with each other in an empathetic way. We have to attack each other just because of who somebody is. And I think that's really sad. I think that we have to do everything in our power to protect the LGBTQ community. I think that there are a lot of ways that we implement laws, and a lot of laws that are on the books right now that need to be updated to reflect where we are as a society, and show that we are accepting of everybody, and we need to be allies on this. And I think, and I'm hoping that the state law that was passed here recently, in the anti-trans law that I mentioned earlier, I hope that is struck down in the courts, and that politicians quit using kids to make political points.
All right, folks, we were intending on doing this for about an hour, so we're coming up near the end of this for tonight. So we probably got enough time for one or two more questions. So if you have one or two more questions for Nick, please do let us know here in the chat. We appreciate all of you joining us on Facebook and Twitter for this conversation here this evening. We plan on doing more of these throughout the campaign, particularly because, of course, we especially here in Arkansas do still find ourselves in a very difficult position with regards to the pandemic. And we want to make sure that you are able to connect with candidates running for office. It should not be that difficult to get in touch with folks that are trying to represent you in the House of Representatives. And so we appreciate you all taking the time this evening, joining us, asking these very important questions. So I just now want to ask, while we wait to see if we get another question here, Nick, how are you feeling? How have you, what do you think about how this has gone so far tonight? Have you enjoyed it?
I've really enjoyed it. And I'm a political nerd, so I could sit and talk all night. I wish we could, but yeah, no, I think it's went really well. I appreciate the tough questions too. It's going to help me, be better along the campaign. But it shows me what y'all care about and what's impacting your lives. And so that's what really matters to me, is making sure we're addressing those issues. And look, I know it's a Q&A, so obviously I'm giving an answer to everything, but I think something our politicians have to be better of is like admitting when they don't know everything and being willing to listen more than we talk sometimes. And I just want to say, I not only are we going to do this throughout the campaign, but if I'm elected, I want to hold a town hall in every county in the second district every year, if not more. I'm sure we would do community events and all kinds of things like that throughout the year, but specifically a town hall to hear out constituents. That's something I did on my time on the city council. I don't think it had ever been done before in Rosebud, but we did, or I did a community or a coffee with the councilman event every month, just to hear out what people are thinking about. And sometimes it was, hey, what do you think about this idea? Why aren't we doing this? Or sometimes it was just to hear out things that they're struggling with, or just to learn more information about what was going on at City Hall. And so I want to be that same kind of resource. And I think, like Blake said, that's what it's all about, is about representing you. And that's the kind of congressman I would love to be.
All right, we've got one more question. I think to me, it reads like a stylistic question almost about what you would do if you get elected. So I think but I think it does fit in a lot with what you've been talking about. So this can be our last question for tonight. What do you feel would be more important, working in the background to get legislation passed that benefits the second district, Arkansas, and the United States in general, or being a more vocal advocate for these issues?
That's a good question. I think that I think you have to be a little bit of both, right? I think there are times where maybe there's an issue you don't know as much about, or maybe is not as relevant for your district potentially, which I don't know if that's the case, because all issues are relevant. But I would say that, yeah, there's going to be times when you have to kind of play the background and work with people more behind the scenes to make sure some things get done, just because politics can be tricky. But I definitely lean more towards being an advocate, being more someone that's outspoken, and not in the political theater way, right? But just because, right now we have a representative that is in the background, not really well known nationally, not really working with any of the major players to pass major legislation that's really going to make an impact on our citizens' lives. And so I think we just deal with so many big issues, right? Climate change, COVID, economic inequality. We're falling behind with other countries in the world in education. People are living in poverty right now, right? And these are things that, yes, like working in the background or maybe has to be done sometimes, but these are things that people have to speak up on. Right now we have a representative that's not speaking up on most of these issues. And so, yeah, I would love to be kind of that bold advocate that is willing to, maybe take a little heat just because I speak up more, but we're finding solutions to problems, and we're advocating for the things that are truly going to solve those problems, not just the things that sound good, to consultants or to political media, but things that are really going to solve problems.
All right. Well, solving problems. Let's slap that on a bumper sticker. Sounds like a pretty good theme for a campaign. All right. Well, everybody, thanks so much for hanging out with us for a little bit here on your Saturday evening. Reminder one more time, coming up tomorrow morning, 9:30 KATV. Nick's going to be interviewed by Roby Brock on Talk Business and Politics. Make sure you check that out. And coming up this Tuesday at 11 o'clock Tuesday morning, on Nick's alma mater, the University of Central Arkansas campus in Conway, we're going to have our in-person campaign kickoff. You can find the information about that on the campaign Facebook page. We're also going to have that up on Twitter and Instagram for everybody to see. Please, if you want to come, and we would love to see you there, please wear a mask and socially distance. We would love to see you there. Nick, any final thoughts before we head off?
Yeah, the last thing I want to say is visit our website, cartwrightforarkansas.com. It has a little bit more about me. There's ways you can get involved, but one of the best ways you can get involved, and I hate asking for money, but we are going up against a millionaire that has been taking money from special interests and super PACs and all these, really rich people for a long time. So we have to have grassroots support. We have to have people willing to just chip in a little bit of money here and there. So it would mean a lot, because I don't want to take, corporate PAC money. I don't want to take lobbyist donations. If you could just chip in $5, $10, whatever you can afford, that information's on our website as well, cartwrightforarkansas.com. It would mean a lot so that we can get this thing off on the right track and really be able to compete.
All right. And once again, thanks for joining us, everybody. We will see you down the road. You'll see us just about everywhere. I think Nick's got a really packed schedule over the next couple of days. So make sure you stay tuned for all that. Once again, thanks for joining us, everybody. And